So Strengths Quest is not unlike other assessments that you might have taken in the past to measure different personality traits or characteristics about you in order to give you a little bit more introspection into who you are. You get a top 5 signature themes, as we used to call them. Now they're called we just call them strengths because most people just kind of interchange them. Those are mine. I'm a strategic, maximizer, ranger adaptability, and futuristic. Essentially, my signature themes, when you put them all together, make me an excellent chess player. So if you're ever interested in playing chess, you can certainly stop by my office. I have a Star Wars chessboard. We can play. But what we're going to do today is we're going to explore your strengths and how they connect to each other and how they play with each other in order to create a unique you. There are 34 total themes in Strengths Quest, and so you get a top 5. They do go in order. So my number 1 is strategic, and then 2, 3, 4, and 5. You do have a 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, all the way to 34. We just don't give that to you, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. So before we get into your signature themes, your strengths, and what they mean, I want to give you a little bit of background information about what Strengths Quest is and where it came from. The most important thing that we're going to talk about today is we're going to talk about strengths-based development, not deficit-based development. I know on the first day I talked a little bit about that. I treat my course, the way I work with students, my advising, my teaching, all of that from a strengths mindset as opposed to a deficit mindset. Thinking that you have an A when you start this class as opposed to you have a 0 and you have to build up to an A. Here you start with the top and you go down depending on the things that you do in class. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. We're also going to be talking about the things that you naturally do and do well. All right? And so what are those things and how do you discover what your talents are? One of the hardest things I think we do as human beings is spend a lot of our lives trying to figure out what we're really good at so we can focus on doing that for whatever that might be, our work, our pleasure, our service to mankind, whatever that might be. We spend a lot of time trying to figure out what we're naturally good at. And so hopefully today we'll be able to discover together what you're naturally good at if you didn't know already. So Strengths Quest is built upon this understanding of you need to know yourself and reflect upon yourself. So this is why I like this assessment when you're talking about co-op and talking about professional development and student development and those types of things, because it forces you to think about a little bit more about who you are and what you bring to the table. We've all been given gifts and talents that make us unique people, and those gifts and talents can be transformed into strengths. All the strengths that we're going to talk about today are equal. None of them are better than the other. All right? One of the most important aspects of developing yourself as a leader in your field is knowing what your strengths are so that you can productively apply them in the tasks that you are going to be given. Right? And so it's not unlike the tools of your trade. If you're in computer engineering or computer science, the software applications that we know how to use, MATLAB, things like that, it's not unlike those types of things. Knowing those things very, very well. Knowing how to use a protractor if you're an architect, right? Those tools that you're using in those fields are essential skills, knowledge that you need to have. Not unlike your strengths here in this field. And so in order to be successful on co-op, in order to be a successful employee, in order to be a successful leader, manager, project manager someday, or CEO, you need to know what your strengths are and how to productively apply them. So some really important key findings of the research that has been done on strengths just in general. First, that we use strengths mostly in order to effectively lead others. And so it's important that our followers know what our strengths are and how to best effectively lead them. But it's also really important that we know what our strengths are and what the strengths are of other people so we can maximize our teams. And so today is part 1, knowing yourself. Next week's spring break, but when we get back, we're going to do part 2, which is knowing other people's strengths and how to utilize those in order to create effective teams. So Gallup is an organization. Has anyone ever heard of Gallup? What is Gallup from? What have you heard it from? Gallup poll, that's exactly right. They're the ones who do all those massive polls, especially around really important elections, right? And so they're administering lots and lots of polls, so they're collecting lots and lots of data on people all of the time. And so many, many, many years ago, more than 30 years ago, they started putting together all of these research interviews of all these people in their top areas of performance. People, top achievers, really people who are at the top of their game, and try to figure out what made them so good at what they were doing. Right? And so they conducted all of these interviews, and they put together an assessment that you took, and then since then, over 34 million people have taken it and have completed it. Right? And so one of the interesting aspects of Strengths Quest is not just used in higher education, although we do use it quite a bit. In the business world, they call it Strengths Finder. And in, for example, Best Buy. Does anyone work at Best Buy? No? If you know anyone who works at Best Buy, you can ask them. Best Buy as a corporation, all the way from the CEO, all the way down to retail employees, take the Strengths Finder indicator, and managers use that to help them determine where are the best places to put employees. And so as an organization, they use strengths in order to increase productivity. And in fact, lots of the studies that Gallup has conducted has shown that when an organization goes from a deficit model, saying like, you need to learn how to do this job better, to a strengths model saying, let's take the things that you already do very well and apply them to your job, productivity raises 40% on average. And so it's an incredible tool to be used. Some of the corporations and companies that you are going to be working for may use this already. So Strengths Quest, Strengths Finder, the Strengths paradigm is all based on positive psychology. Does anyone know what positive psychology is? Yes?
Isn't it kind of like a way to explain is that it kind of sees the best in people? Like,
yeah, okay.
kind of, I don't know how to explain it, but it's, does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, okay, sure. So essentially what you're trying to explain, I think, is positive psychology is the study of the human condition approaching things from what's right with you as opposed to what's wrong with you. All right? So imagine a world where we only asked, what's right with you? What are you doing well? And so this is to be contrasted with the weakness model, right? As opposed to looking at the things that you're no longer good, or that you're not good at, and making those things better. So there's a lot of myths when it comes to strengths and weaknesses, especially around weaknesses. And one of the greatest myths is that you will grow over time in your areas of weakness. But the truth is that you'll actually grow over time more in your area of strength, regardless of how focused you are on the weaknesses. And so this is a great illustration. So if you start at point A, and your strengths level is here, and your weakness level is here, and you work on both of them equally, maybe even sometimes you work on weaknesses a little bit more, no matter what you do, over time, you will increase in both areas, but your strengths will doubly increase more so than your weaknesses. So, a deficit model is always focusing on the weakness, and a positivist or strengths model is always focusing on the strengths. And that's what we're going to do here today. Another way to look at it, and one of the reasons why this is so hard to do, is how we grade students. So if this was your report card, or you can imagine yourself, your classes from last semester, or when you were in high school, and you get grades, and you show your parents or your guardians, what's the first thing most people do? Yeah. That's right. They look for the worst thing you did, point it out, and then say, how come you got such a bad grade in this? What can we do to make this grade get better? Now, I wouldn't suggest using a strengths model in your classes and just say, oh, I'm just not good at math, so I'm not going to even try. Don't do that. Keep working on math, especially if you're an engineer. But the point is, all throughout your life, we've taught you from a deficit model. We've taught you that don't think about your strengths. You're already good at those. Leave those alone. Only think about things that you're not good at and work on those, because eventually things will become even and you'll be great. But what that even is, what they're not telling you, is average. Even is average. And so if you're constantly only working on things that you're not any good at, your grades are only ever going to be average. And what happens the next semester when you realize, ooh, I got a C in math. I really need to step it up next semester in math. Oftentimes, what happens? your other grades, where you were doing well naturally, where you didn't really have to try very hard, start to slip. Because when we start focusing too much on our weaknesses, we forget to work on our strengths. And so again, do your classes the way you're supposed to. But when it comes to life, I want you to approach things from a strengths perspective. Has anyone ever heard the phrase, jack of all trades? What is the rest of that phrase? Master of none. Jack of all trades. Hey, look at all the things I can do. Master of none. I'm not very good at any of them. I can do them well. I can pass. Well, if you just want to pass, that's one thing. But if you want to do them well and do something great, let's focus on our strengths. So, what you've been given is an assessment on your talent. Where does talent come from? That's what it's trying to figure it out for you. All right? And talents are going to be the basis for our strengths. So what is a talent? A talent is something that is naturally recurring, a pattern of thought, feeling, or behavior that can be productively applied. So it's something that is naturally occurring. So if you're sitting here yourself thinking, what gifts do I have that come naturally? What are those? How do I figure out what those are? Here's some things that might cross your mind. If you've ever said, without even thinking, I automatically do, right? Ever since I can remember, I've always been good at X. Yeah? It was effortless. I just get it all the time. It just works for me. Those are clues to where things of talent might be for you. And so if you're thinking, oh, all throughout my life, I've just been naturally good at solving puzzles. You know, put together a 1,000-piece puzzle and I'm done with it within an hour, right? Or I've always naturally been good at reading. Give me a 500-page book and I'll be done with it by the end of the weekend, right? These are all areas of suggestion that we might have an area of talent there, that we might be able to productively apply that in some fashion in order to turn that into a strength and make that a useful piece of what we're doing with our lives. And so going with the puzzle thing, how many people in here are good puzzle solvers? It's a fair number of you. How many are good at building things, like Legos when they were kids, right? Tinker Toys, Lincoln Logs, right? I love Legos. My son loves Legos. He plays with them every single day. And I always think of my son now, he's 3, when I do this workshop. I've been doing this for a long time, but now that I've had a kid, it really focuses things for me. And so he right now loves to build with Legos. He loves to solve puzzles. He loves to read. He can't read, but he loves to be read too. He loves looking at the pictures. He memorizes books so he can read them to himself. He's 3, right? And now we're not talking like he's memorizing War and Peace. It's, Berenstain Bear's Spooky Old Tree, and he knows every page. He looks at the picture, he knows it. That's good memory connection, right? And so he has all these natural talents. And somewhere along the line, we tend to forget what those are. So my greatest example is when I ask my 3-year-old son if he's an artist, what do you think he says? Yes. Absolutely. I used to teach kindergarten, and I would ask my kindergarten students, how many of you are artists? How many hands do you think went up in the room of like 20 students? 20. Now, contrast that with this class. Are you an artist? Raise your hand. Look at this guy back here. He's the best because he's like, so little bit, maybe. That's what happens, right? Now, maybe it's because, well, I was an artist when I was in kindergarten because the level of, what was judged to be good was much, much less than what it is today. Like my stick figure when I was in kindergarten was rocking. And today, not so much. And so, yes, that might not actually be an area of talent for you. Right? But we are all artists in some way, right? We all have talents in some way. It's just either we didn't refine them enough, we didn't work on them enough, or we just forgot, right? And so what this does is it forces you to rethink about all the things that you're naturally gifted at. But the trick here is whether it's a thought, pattern, a feeling, behavior, some of us might have a talent that's physical, like I was always good at basketball, I was always a good swimmer, whatever. It can be productively applied. So if you're the greatest basketball player that ever lived, but you never play the game, then it's really not an area of talent for you, right? So if you're super fantastic at math, and you don't apply that in any way, then math is not going to be one of your areas of talent. Contrast that again with a strength. A strength is the ability to provide that near perfect, consistent application of that talent. All right? So that's what a strength is. And so going back to problem solving, puzzles, right? So if that is my talent, puzzles, solving problems, figuring out the bigger picture, what that might be, that talent, if I refine it through knowledge and skills, I practice more puzzles. I maybe go to a school about how to do puzzles, right? I learn different skills on how to do the puzzles. What's the first piece you put together when you solve a puzzle? The edges, right? So you figure those things out, right? Those are the skills you've developed over time. When you refine those talents with those skills and knowledge, that's when you can productively apply them as a strength.